A 5-meter 2-ton SUV just hit 94 horsepower, spins a full 360 degrees on its own axis, and floats through a flood. Toyota can't do that, Land Rover can't, Mercedes can't, and this thing costs a fraction of what they charge. For decades, the premium off-road SUV segment has felt like a closed club. Toyota, Land Rover, and Mercedes built their reputations on heritage, mechanical simplicity, and a kind of unshakable trust that comes from selling the same basic formula for 30 years. A heavy steel ladder frame, a big diesel or petrol engine, a traditional torque converter automatic, and a price tag that assumes buyers will pay almost anything for a badge. But this vehicle doesn't come from a scrappy startup chasing hype. It comes from Jetour, the rugged off-road and adventure division of Chery Automobile, one of China's oldest and most export-focused car manufacturers, with decades of experience, a massive global supply chain, and an R&D budget that keeps growing year after year. This isn't a concept car or a renderings-only promise. The Jetour G700 is already on roads and in rivers right now, in 2026. And here's the part that should make legacy automakers nervous. Chery didn't try to copy the old formula and make it slightly cheaper. They took the entire architecture, the powertrain, the chassis logic, the way torque gets to the wheels, and rebuilt it around a plug-in hybrid system that, on paper, makes the old internal combustion approach look like it's stuck in the previous decade. So how did a brand best known for affordable compact cars suddenly produce something that outspecs a Land Cruiser 300 on nearly every metric that matters off-road? The answer lies in how the powertrain actually works. And that's where things get genuinely interesting. Start with the Land Cruiser 300. It's a vehicle built on a formula that's worked for generations. A large turbocharged engine sends power through a multi-speed automatic transmission, which then routes it through mechanical differentials to the wheels. It's proven, it's durable, and millions of owners trust it. But it has one fundamental limitation that's baked into the physics of how it works: response time. When you need power instantly, pulling out of deep mud, overtaking on a narrow mountain road, or correcting a slide on loose gravel, that traditional drivetrain has to think. The turbo needs to spool up. The transmission needs to find the right gear, sometimes hunting between two of them. The differentials need a moment to figure out where traction actually exists. None of this takes long in human terms. Maybe half a second, maybe a full second, but in an emergency off-road situation, half a second can be the difference between climbing out of trouble and getting stuck in it. The Jetour G700 attacks this problem from a completely different angle. Instead of relying purely on a mechanical chain of command, it pairs a 2.0-liter turbocharged combustion engine with a dual-motor electric drivetrain in a plug-in hybrid configuration. The combustion engine handles sustained power and charging. The electric motors handle response. The combined output, 904 horsepower and over 1,035 Nm of torque, delivered essentially the instant you press the accelerator. There's no spooling, no gear hunting, no lag. For a vehicle this size, over 5.1 meters long, built on a heavy body-on-frame chassis, a 0 to 100 km time of around 4.6 seconds isn't about bragging rights at a stoplight. It's about something more practical. When you're towing a trailer up a loose, rocky incline and you need traction right now, the G700 simply delivers it without the half-second thinking gap that defines traditional drivetrains. This is the core argument Chery is making to the market. Instant electric torque isn't just a performance number. It's a safety feature in situations where hesitation has consequences. Now to the part that genuinely separates this vehicle from everything else in its class. Its approach to two of the biggest fears any off-roader has: flooding and being stranded with no fuel. Start with flooding. Every premium SUV brand sells an image of toughness, but the uncomfortable truth is that once water reaches a certain height, usually somewhere around the hood line, a traditional combustion engine can ingest water through the air intake. The result is hydro-lock. Water enters the cylinders, and because liquid doesn't compress like air does, the engine seizes, often catastrophically and permanently. It's one of the most common ways an expensive 4x4 gets destroyed in a flood, and it happens to vehicles that cost well over $100,000. Jetour's engineering team approached this problem almost like a military requirement, rather than a marketing checkbox. The G700 has a standard wading depth rating of 900 mm, already higher than most rivals, but it goes further with what's described as an emergency amphibious mode. Through reinforced chassis sealing, a positive pressure cabin system designed to keep water from entering, and a fully sealed, waterproofed electric drivetrain. The vehicle is engineered to remain operational, and even mobile, in water deep enough to fully submerge a traditional engine bay. Think about what that actually means in practice. A family caught in a flash flood, or a community where a bridge has been washed out, isn't necessarily stranded. The vehicle becomes in effect a temporary lifeboat, something no Land Cruiser, Defender, or G-Wagon is designed to be. Then there's the second fear, range anxiety, but specifically in extreme environments, deserts, remote wilderness, disaster zones, where charging infrastructure simply doesn't exist. Pure electric vehicles, however impressive their efficiency, face a real limitation here. If the battery runs out in the middle of nowhere, there's often no solution nearby. The G700 sidesteps this entirely. Hidden within its reinforced ladder frame is a 30 kWh battery pack running on an 800-volt architecture, allowing for fast charging when you do have access to infrastructure. But the real trick is combining that battery with a substantial 100-liter fuel tank and an intelligent hybrid energy management system. Together, these give the G700 a combined real-world range reportedly exceeding 1,000 km on a single fill-in charge. And there's a bonus most buyers won't think about until they need it. Because of the large battery buffer, the G700 can function as a mobile power source through bidirectional charging, running power tools, camping equipment, or even acting as a backup generator for a cabin during an outage. While a pure AV owner might be calculating remaining kilometers anxiously, a G700 owner has a built-in safety margin that traditional AVs simply can't match in these scenarios. So how does the interior experience stack up? This is where the value argument against legacy brands gets sharper. Step into a Mercedes G-Class or a high-end Land Rover Defender and you're paying a substantial premium for materials, craftsmanship, and brand heritage, all genuinely high quality, but built around a fairly traditional idea of luxury. Leather, switches, dials, a sense of old-world solidity. The G700 takes a different approach, leaning into what modern buyers, especially in markets like China, increasingly expect. Large, high-resolution displays showing real-time telemetry on pitch, roll, weighting depth, and hybrid energy flow. Heavy use of acoustic insulation, double laminated glass, and active noise cancellation to create a remarkably quiet cabin even on rough terrain. And comfort features like ventilated, massaging seats paired with a premium sound system. The result is a cabin that feels closer to a quiet, tech-forward lounge than a utilitarian off-roader, while the exterior remains built for genuinely punishing terrain. Now, the inevitable comparison, the Yangwang U8, currently the benchmark for extreme Chinese off-road engineering. To be clear about the technical reality, the G700 doesn't use the U8's quad-motor independent setup. It runs a dual-motor all-wheel drive system on Chery's Gaia platform. But here's what makes this interesting from a market perspective. Despite using a simpler dual-motor layout, the G700 can still execute a 360-degree tank turn on its own axis, leveraging that combined 1.05 Nm of torque to rotate within tight spaces, a maneuver normally associated with quad-motor systems. It also matches the U8 on several headline numbers. The 900mm weighting depth, amphibious capability, over 900 horsepower, and a combined range past 1,000 kilometers. In other words, Chery is delivering U8-level headline capability through a mechanically simpler and presumably less expensive architecture. That's the number that should worry legacy automakers most. Not the horsepower figure, but the cost-to-capability ratio. So where does this leave the traditional players? Toyota, Land Rover, and Mercedes built their reputations on durability, simplicity, and decades of trust. And those things still matter to a lot of buyers. But the G700 raises a question that's becoming harder to avoid. When a vehicle can match or exceed your flagship's off-road capability, flood resistance, and range, while adding instant torque hybrid performance and a more modern cabin, at what is likely to be a significantly lower price, what exactly are buyers paying the premium for? The Jetour G700 won't replace a Land Cruiser's reputation overnight. Reliability records take years to build, and brand trust isn't something that changes with a single spec sheet. But it does represent something real, a sign of how quickly Chinese manufacturers have moved from good enough to genuinely competitive at the top of the market, in a segment that, until recently, nobody thought they'd seriously challenge. The question now isn't whether Chinese automakers can compete in this space. It's how long the established brands have before they need a real answer.